Hello, and welcome to Creative Perspectives, a show about artists and artistic happenings in the DMV area. I'm your host, Tron Kim Sr., and I'm delighted to have my friend and colleague, Liz Vorlacek, an Alexandria-based sculptor and artist, join me on today's show. In addition to being a professional artist, Liz also teaches art to high school students at Episcopal High School and serves as the director and curator of the Angie Newman Johnson Gallery located on Episcopal's campus. As a professional artist, Liz has exhibited and had her pieces juried in various galleries and exhibitions all over the country, from Seattle, Washington to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Asheville, North Carolina, and to, of course, the DMV area. You can currently find an exhibition of Liz's works titled Building Parts, Collage a Day at the Passage Gallery located in the Rachel M. Schlesinger Concert Hall and Art Center on the Alexandria campus of the Northern Virginia Community College. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
It's so fun to have you.
Thank you.
So first, tell us about how you got your start as an artist and sort of what's inspired you along the way.
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, and my parents are artists, and they met in art school. And so I grew up in a fixer-upper of a house where every door in the house was painted a different primary color because the house was a former cooperative nursery school. There was a full-on sandbox in the downstairs living room. And so we grew up in this house that was full of creativity, full of joy.
Sounds like it.
And it really inspired me to kind of continue in my parents' footsteps.
Yeah. Do you remember your first piece of artwork that you did?
Probably something made of mud or some sort of tactile material, I think.
So it started a long time ago.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So how would you describe the aesthetics of your pieces and your artworks?
Well, my primary medium is sculpture with a focus in ceramics. And for the last 20 years or so, I've been working in I would say the still life tradition and using objects that I make and juxtapose and assemble in different ways to create environments and settings and kind of setting up a sense of place. And I do the same thing in my collage work, yet they tend to be more landscapes. So
what typically will inspire you, and how do you figure out like what pieces to put together and what mediums or materials to utilize for a particular piece?
Yeah, I'm highly inspired by my environment, and my husband is a botany teacher at Episcopal and also an avid gardener, and we garden together on campus. And so I'd really say the flower garden, the great outdoors, things that I collect, whether it be for my 2D work or for my 3D work. And then also textiles is a huge influence for me. So I use a lot of clay to mimic cloth in the tradition of trompe l'oeil and kind of making a material look like cloth, but yet using clay, or making it look like an apple, but using clay. So
and
kind
they
of
look good
fooling
enough
the
to eat.
eye.
They look good enough to eat. What for you has been the biggest challenge of your journey so far as an artist?
I would say it was when Nat and I lived out in Seattle, and it was during kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, and we kind of got priced out of being able to live in that city, and it's a place that's near and dear to my heart, but there wasn't a whole lot of rent control, and so we were trying to make our way as artists, but we decided as the rents got higher and higher, we decided to pursue more education. And moved east and went to the New York State College of Ceramics and had a great experience, but it was a hard time getting to that place. But all in all, it ended up working out well.
It's too bad, but the rent situation, it's a whole other conversation altogether.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
But there's always a silver lining. that brought you to the East Coast. And
Yes, happy to be back.
yeah. How did you find your way to Episcopal and to teaching art to high school students?
I got my career going in teaching at a Boys and Girls Club when I was in between my freshman and sophomore year of college. And I found my way there when I was working at a restaurant. It was actually robbed at gunpoint, and so I kind of took a real shift on my plan for the summer and decided I wanted to do something good for the community, something where I was giving back. And so I found my way to the Boys and Girls Club and applied for a job and got it that day, and then started there. And then I found, many years later, found my way to Episcopal once I had gone to grad school. And immediately when I visited the campus, really fell in love with the place and really liked the community and the sense of a small town. I really enjoy that about the boarding school life.
Yeah, that's what drew us in as well when we came to visit Episcopal. Yeah. So I'd love to sort of talk about some of your artwork, and,
Sure.
we'll sort of start here with the piece that you brought in. So you might have seen this on display as we were talking. So this piece is called Nesting. So you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, this piece here is a clay assemblage. So the part on the top is a cast apple on a spool of ribbon. And so this was all made by hand. And then these pieces I added recently. This is a bunch of cut up moving blankets that almost kind of create like another sense of enclosure or kind of like a swaddling feel for it. And then it's on top of a marble, a little plinth or stand that I found in kind of a garbage dump area of building materials. And I love the contrast of like kind of something that's very basic with the moving blanket to a fairly luxurious material, the marble, and then again in contrast to kind of the punch of color.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So can you sort of walk me through the creative process of the apple, the ribbon? Sort of, did you make them separately and then you put them together? And how did you make both of the pieces?
Yeah, so when you do a casting, you start with either something you formed with clay or an actual apple. And this was a casting of an actual apple. And so once you have the mold, you can make many parts for many years. This is a mold I've been using for years.
Yes, I've seen this apple a few times.
Yes, yes, red, green, different, white, right? It's something that I come back to. And then the clay cloth is formed on a flat slab, and later in the program I'll show how to do some of that. And then, something like coming up with the idea for this, I'm a bit of a pack rat, and so I tend to have a lot of things around me that I can look at and be inspired by. And one day I was looking at this moving blanket that was just folded up, and I was like, that's really cool. There's a lot of interest to that material, the texture and just the bit of the metaphor of the idea of moving yet nesting, and so some of that appealed to me, and I guess the poetry in the piece. So
that's awesome.
Thank you.
So I'd love to talk about one of your collages, and you sort of did a project for a year. This is part of your collection, your exhibit. At the studio in Northern Virginia, that's the Collage. That you sort of did a collage a day. And sort of what inspired you to do that?
Well, I get a lot of inspiration or creative energy from teaching. And so one day in the studio in a program called Afternoon Art, I was working with a group of students, and we were doing collage work, and I had brought in a lot of found materials for the students to use. And I kind of looked at them and I said, I wonder if I were to do a collage a day for a year, if I could do that as kind of a real way to keep my studio practice in a more robust fashion. We're working on it every day.
Yeah,
and I think my students thought I was a little bit crazy, but I did it.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it and created a very a large body of work, 365
That's
plus
amazing.
pieces.
That's a lot of dedication.
Thank you. It was fun.
So would you do in the morning, the evening, sort of?
It depended on the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The important part was that I always had my materials. So
Okay.
if I traveled, I would bring some things with me, collect some things.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the collage that you brought, or that you sent to us for us to talk about, called Scottish Garden.
Yeah.
So walk us sort of through
Right.
that piece.
Well, the particular piece, if you look in the center of it, it has a scrap of, from a calendar, a Charles Rennie Mackintosh floral bit of scrap. He's a Scottish artist, and when I was a freshman in high school, my family moved to Scotland for a year, and my parents taught there. And my siblings and I, we attended school and just really immersed ourselves in the culture.
Yeah,
So that was a very impactful time in my life. Not a totally easy time, but impactful. And so the surrounding of the collage has, I believe it's an arts and crafts motif that's Rennie Mackintosh is on top, and then I've painted on top of that in many layers. So it's a bit of a homage to Mackintosh and my time in Scotland, and that one is going to go to my parents.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, beautiful. That's sweet. That's sweet.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have time to talk about your last piece that you sort of sent along, called Cursive to Memorial to Cursive 2. So tell us about that.
Yes, well that piece is in a series, so was a piece that preceded it, and that piece is a little bit near and dear to my heart in the sense that I grew up, I went to Catholic school, and cursive writing, although it was a hard thing for me, I really think of it as like an extension of drawing. And so as an adult, it's kind of become a bit of an extension of my artistic practice.
Okay.
And one day in class, my student, who I had written some comments on one of her papers, couldn't read my cursive writing. She said, "Miss V, I can't read this."
Yeah, yeah.
And she didn't want to tell me, right? And I thought, well, it's because my handwriting is really messy. But then I did some research, and I found out that it's not really taught in the curriculum anymore.
No, yeah.
Which to me was kind of like a sorrowful moment, because I'm a real letter writer. I love correspondence through the hand, because it's just more personal. I mean, I write plenty of emails and texts and such too.
I learned to write cursive in third grade. It was a rite of passage. I felt like it's something that you had to do in your educational journey.
Yes,
and it's not something that kids are really doing these days.
Yeah. So on that piece, the tablets are, some of them have like the alphabet on them, some have words or markings, and so it's a bit of like a memorial, or kind of a wistful piece.
Yeah.
So
That's great. That's great. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and during the break, you all are going to see some more of Liz's work, as well as her Instagram handle. So if you want to see more of her work and you want to follow her, please do. And when we come back from the break, Liz is going to do a demo on some pieces that she does, and on some techniques that she uses in ceramics. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in a little bit. Excited to show you a few techniques
on how I make some of my folded clay cloth sculptures. So what I have here is a thick slab of stoneware clay, and I'm going to show you how to thin that out by hand and also using a rolling pin. And then we're going to add some texture, like this fired piece here, with this lace, and showing you a few distressing techniques to make the project look older. So I'm going to move that over there. So when you're stretching your clay, basically you're kind of throwing the clay and also pulling it towards you so that the clay thins out. And this is a super handy technique to be able to use because you don't necessarily need a rolling pin for this. So people that are maybe trying to set up shop at home, all you would really need is a board with some canvas stretched on it. So this is always the first thing that I show my students on how to make slabs before we use a rolling pin or a slab roller or any of those types of things. So this is also very meditative, I think. One of the things I love about my craft and my job and working in clay. Clay is a craft medium. So we, as craftspeople in our art, we do stuff, we make things. So that's another bit of joy of the craft. So you can see the slab is getting pretty thin and pliable right now. And so I am at the point where I can cut it into like a square. Right? Because I'm going to kind of make one of these kerchief or napkin type pieces. So I'm going to cut it with my fettling knife. And then take my scraps and put them over here. Right? And in my work, I like to bevel out my edges and also smooth out the clay so that the canvas texture isn't showing. So I use a palette knife for that. And so what I do here is just kind of smoothing that out and then flipping it, smoothing the other side. And then I also use a lot of remnants of things like old curtains or sheets or things that I can pick up at the thrift store. And they're really handy for moving the clay around. So in my studio, I have a lot of cloth around, clay cloth, and right, the real stuff. So then to bevel your edges, what you do is you put a little remnant on the side and you basically rub your hand along the edge. And I'll do one more side and then I can kind of show you. Kind of hold it up. So you can see that it's kind of giving like a natural thinned out edge to make it look more like fabric. Because in my work, I work in the tradition of like fooling the eye. So I like to make things look, hard materials like ceramics look soft, or make ceramics look like an apple, right? It's kind of fun part of the process. So now that I've done that, and I would, in my own work, I would probably do the other side too, but we don't have a ton of time. So I'm going to just do the one side and see if we have time to do the other. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking remnants of lace. So these are some lace remnants that my mom sent me. And I'm going to put that on top of the slab and make a little composition here. So I'm taking two like that. I only have two of these, so I'll flip them to make a pattern. Then I take a piece of fabric and put it over the top, right? Like so. And this is where my rolling pin comes in handy. So I can just and press down on there without too much pressure, right? Because you don't want to flatten the slab too much. You just want that lace to kind of go into the soft clay, right? And that's a professional baker's pin. So then you take a needle tool and you lift up the lace and you get this excellent texture. And sometimes some parts of it will show more than others. You can see here that sometimes you get a very clear impression. Sometimes it's more ghost-like. But I like that contrast, that it's not perfect. I'm going to go ahead and do these. And then I'm going to show you how to fold it into a form so that we're actually making something other than just a flat tile. Okay. Lift those up. Lift that one up. Okay, so now we're ready. So then what I can do is take this, right, and form it into a 3D thing. And what I do is I use other pieces of clay or other pieces of cloth to kind of create little props, right? To hold the clay in place, almost like that moment in time when you get up from like the dinner table and set your napkin there, or you're at a picnic and you're pulling the napkin or bandana out of the picnic basket. And right, so this is a pretty immediate process. You see that I'm kind of able to get a form in a fairly immediate and like very satisfying way. And then in some of my more complex work, I will make many of these, sometimes even, hundreds, to create a larger composition or a larger still life, like a large mantelpiece or something filling like a large pedestal. And so this clay here is porcelain, this clay here is stoneware, and I work with different clays. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for walking us through that demo. That was really, really cool. And I think for me, like one of the things that I realized as I was watching you was like, like that's something that I could sort of maybe be able to do. And I think I'd always been intimidated by art, but I've never really taken a class ever. Yeah. But then sort of seeing you sort of walk through the process, like, well, that's really doable. That's really something that's approachable that I could do. So thank you for that. So hopefully you've inspired some new artists who are watching.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. So as we sort of wrap up, can you tell us about your upcoming exhibit in August this year in DC?
Oh, yes. I'm very excited about this because it's a solo exhibition. It's at the IAA at Hillier, International Art and Artists. And right now, there's a big group show of 23 of us, and all of us will be having our solos throughout the season at Hillier. Okay. So it's a gallery that's in the DuPont Circle area, so great location. It's right in the neighborhood of the Phillips Collection. And the particular body of work that I will show is inspired by still life, but also an autobiographical take on that. So it's called A Sense of a Self in Still Life. And so I'll have some large-scale assemblages, like a big 10 or 15 foot long mantelpiece called Mantelpiece of Detritus Shaped by the Wind. My poet friend Perry Epps titled it, and some other larger pieces as well as some smaller still life works.
That sounds
So,
amazing. And what was the date for the exhibit?
The date, it's the beginning of August, and the opening is on that first Friday in August. I think it's the 7th or 8th.
Okay.
But you can look it up on their website, the IA&A at Hillier. So,
Perfect. Well, thank you for being a part of our show today.
yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So if you want to view more of Liz's work, you can check her out on Instagram at Liz Vorlicek. That's LizVorlicek. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Liz, for giving us a glimpse of your creative perspective as an artist. And finally, thank you to you all for checking in and tuning in to this episode of Creative Perspectives. I'm your host, Tron Kim Sr., and we'll see you next time.